Hi everyone, it's Tanya Tracy with Flow Physical Therapy and Pilates in Asheville, North Carolina. And I'm here today with another Feature Area Friday. So today's topic was inspired by 3 different clients I had this week, all of whom had old scars. And these scars ranged from 3 years old up to almost 15 years old. And nobody had touched them, addressed them, even talked about the scars. And I feel that that is really important, and it's something we can do to be proactive about healing a certain area. So with scar tissue, you kind of think about like it holds an area firm. So if I were to grab at the shoulder of my shirt here and hold it tight, when I go to raise my arm up, I'm going to feel it pulling. So it's going to restrict my movement. And that can happen with scars where they can get tight and hold things down, and so you lose movement. You can also lose sensation. It can disrupt circulation. So there's a lot of things that scars have kind of a role in, and if we work on it, we can improve that stuff. So working on scars, we want to wait until it is in a healing phase, which is the proliferation phase. Before that, it's more of an inflammation phase, which is part of the healing, but it means that the edges of the incision or the tissue is not together yet, so it's still kind of apart. So we have risk for infection or getting bacteria into that wound, and we don't want to mess with it too much. We just want to give our body a chance to get the edges together and start healing. So the proliferation phase, which starts around day 4, is the point at which our body starts laying down this tough fibrous tissue, which is collagen. And the collagen, when it gets put into that incision area, is kind of this tangled up mesh. It's not really organized. It's just there to hold everything together, kind of like we're quickly trying to give it some stability and fix it. That proliferation phase can go on from around day 4 to about day 21 or so after the incision or the cut is made. And then from day 21 and on is what's called the remodeling phase. And that's where our body goes through. And it kind of starts breaking down this little temporary structure that we had made for the scar, and then replacing it with new tissue, new collagen that's more lined up. And that collagen gets more lined up when we put stress or tension on it. So it gives the collagen fibers direction. So it's not like going in all different directions. It kind of goes in more of a uniform arrangement so that it is pliable, it is stretchable, it can stretch, it can move. It's not quite skin, but it can act similarly. So wounds and incisions and scars, they can happen. It doesn't have to be just that planned surgery like a total knee replacement or rotator cuff repair. It can sometimes be an emergency situation like open heart surgery or an emergency C-section. It could also just be the weekend warrior who goes out and has a crash on their mountain bike and gets a gash and then has to have stitches or some kind of closure for the wound. So again, when we're working on this, always double check with your healthcare provider to make sure that it is appropriate for you to start working on scar massage. You don't want to do too early and disrupt the tissues and interrupt healing. And that goes for things especially like C-sections, where not only do we have the incision on the surface and the skin, but then we also have that deeper incision like the uterus incision, which takes longer for it to heal. And we really have to be careful working on that scar. We don't do it too early. So again, double check with your healthcare provider. So I'm going to show you, I do have my own C-section scar, but because I don't want to get flagged by social media for having inappropriate visuals up, I decided to show you on my arm instead. So I've created a nice scar to show you this massage with. So when we do this, you start superficial or kind of shallow, and really you're just trying to initially just to get the skin to move. I first have people start with a finger on either side of the incision, so you're making these little circles, and when you're doing this, you're not pulling the edges of the incision apart. So it's a very safe way to work on this tissue, and you're not, again, pushing hard, just enough to make the skin move. and you just go in circles up and down the scar. You can do this starting anywhere from 1 minute, if that's all your tolerance is, and you can go up to 10 minutes, and that's about enough. You don't really need to put in a ton of time on it. And if you're too vigorous or you give too much, you can make the area kind of inflamed and annoyed. We have to be gentle and caring, especially in the beginning. Once you hit remodeling phase, you can be more aggressive with the scar, but initially, be kind of gentle. So that's one way. If you know the edges are completely healed together and there's no chance of pulling them apart, you can take your fingers and you now go and make circles along the scar. So again, just moving up and down. You can pause if there's a spot where it's really restricted and just hang out there for a while, making the circles. The other thing you can do is you can go across it and kind of pull on the scar tissue. So again, you're going the length of the scar to do that. You can pinch the scar and do these little turns. So basically, it looks like you're turning a key. So that's to get it moving a little more. You can pick it up and do little wiggles, because scar tissue isn't just the surface. It likes to sometimes tack down to the tissue that's below it. So you do want to be able to pick it up and move it. Now, some areas are going to be much easier to pick up and move than others. So if it's closer to a bony spot, it might be a little bit more tender and it might be a little tougher sometimes to pick it up. So that's one thing you can do. You can roll it, where you're kind of just doing this, like this kind of motion. You can also do something where you're stretching it. So one finger on one end and you're pulling those fingers apart. I tend to do this with my thumbs. So a thumb would go here, and if I had a free hand, I would put the other thumb here and kind of pull them away from each other and just hold it. You can do it just on the surface of the skin, or you can go deep and start getting into that deeper tissue, the deeper fascia that's underneath, doing those little pulls. So again, you're just, to your tolerance, working on it, and you find the spots over time. You'll start to notice where it's stiff and really work at it. Sometimes the ends of the scars are a little bit easier to work on than the center, so you can sometimes just start at the edges and see if it gives way and lets you get to the center. What I have found is my own C-section scar actually was the opposite, and it was very tight at the edges and more mobile in the center. So sometimes that happens as well, depending on where the scar is situated or how they closed it up. The other thing to take note of is there's nerves that are cut through, little surface nerves, when they do an incision or when you get a cut. And those are all growing back in that space. So keep in mind it may be sensitive. It's kind of the idea of like a newborn baby is really hypersensitive and startles easily to different sounds and light and that sort of thing. New nerves do the same thing. So when we touch them, they might kind of be like, "Ugh." So be gentle when you touch, kind of gradually push in. Don't just quickly push. And just know this area might be extra sensitive. The other thing to note with scars that doesn't always get talked about is it is a trauma to our body. And if our body perceives something as a trauma, if it was truly traumatic to us, we might even have these emotions that we feel when we're working on the tissue. Personally, for me, when I would work on my C-section scar, initially, I used to get a really upset stomach. I would feel queasy. And part of it was because I really didn't like that I had to have this emergency C-section. So just give yourself a little bit of grace. Do your best when you're working on it, but understand if emotions pop up, if you feel upset, if you feel grossed out, if it is really hard, allow yourself to feel that, acknowledge it, and just do what you can and know that that might be there. You might have an emotional release when you're working on the scar and not just a tissue release. So be prepared. So a couple things. Sometimes it can feel more comfortable, especially if you're doing things like pulling and sliding on it, which is kind of stripping is what that's called. If you're doing stripping, it might be more comfortable to use something like oil or lotion. If you use a lotion, make sure it is non-scented. It makes it a little less likely to have problems with skin irritation, or you can just use coconut oil, which is very easy to do. You can also use certain tools. This tool I have is just it's a gua sha tool. You just press and pull. You can pull this way, which it is not as easy on a forearm as it is on other body parts, but this is one way you can use to work on the tissue. If your hands get tired easily, if you have arthritis in your fingers, this is something you can just use to kind of work that tissue. You can come at different angles. So again, a tool like a gua sha tool, you don't have to have this. You can even use, like, if you have a really smooth spoon, you can use the handle of a spoon to do it. You can use like the dog bone wrenches, the smooth edge of it to do that. But just be gentle when you're using tools, because you're not feeling as much through your fingertips. You're relying on a tool. The other thing that I sometimes use, because picking up a scar is really important, being able to pick it up and pull it away from that tissue. But sometimes it's really hard, and sometimes our fingers can't get into the space, or also it just might be not something that is feasible for our hands to do in general for the location. So I use this, and this is a cupping system. You know, cupping, typically people think of it as like the glass globes, and somebody puts a little heat source in, and then you stick it on the skin and it sucks the skin up into it. And then you leave it there. But we don't leave things there when we're working on scar tissue, we're moving it. So for me, and I'll see if this works, it's a little hard on a forearm, but I'm putting it on here, and it's creating a suction, which is easier said than done when you're doing it one-handed. So putting it on here and creating a suction, which, if you can see, that pulls my skin up. When I do this, I do use coconut oil so that I can slide this up and down, but you don't have to slide it. You can just put it on and you can move it around. But again, as you can see, it pulls it in, and you can just move it. I keep losing the suction because it's a weird spot to be using that. You can find those online. It doesn't have to be that big corded thing. That's a whole set. You can find them in just sets of 4. And there are these little silicone ones. So if you put silicone cupping set, they'll look like this little dome thing with another little spot, and you just squish it and it pulls it up. And those are really nice to use as well. So I hope this was helpful. If you have a scar, give it some love, give it some attention, and try and help it out. And you might find that it helps your body out as well. So if you like this, if it was helpful, please do all those social media things, liking, sharing, subscribing, blah, blah, blah. And if you want to see more videos, I am on YouTube at Flow Physical Therapy and Pilates. And I also have them on Facebook and on Instagram. So if you want to know more about my business and what I do in my clinic, my website is www.flowptandpilates.com. I hope to see you guys next week.